So as I listen, I am feeling once again inspired. And what has particularly inspired me is the degree to which folks are thinking strategically, practically, at a very detailed level about where are the places where you can make change and what are the practical solutions backed up by research, backed up by data, backed up by experience that allows us to create a set of communities that are safe and just, safe and fair, safe and non-discriminatory, and that is possible. And I think that one of the things that has been raised is the fact that we don't have the capacity to eradicate 400 years of racism in one fell swoop. So if we think that this is a seismic shift, I hope people don't feel like, well, nothing's going to happen once we figure this out. As I've been known to quote Dr. King, I've said frequently, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We bend it. All of you have bent it over the last 4, 5, 6, 10 years. And we are seeing the fruits of those labors in the degree of awareness that is out there. Look, think about some of the people who have unequivocally spoken out against what happened in Minneapolis. I mean, you have, I just saw Jim Harbaugh, sorry, I know we got, the Ohio State contingent here, but you got Jim Harbaugh, the coach of Michigan football, marching today. That's not something that was happening 5, 6 years ago, although Jim, I know, and he's been on the right side of this issue for quite some time. You have unlikely participants because all of you have worked so hard to raise awareness. That's the progress that has been made. It doesn't mean everything's been solved. The only question I think maybe might be worthwhile for me to throw out there, even though I've read enough of the literature to have a pretty good sense of what the answer is going to be. Brittany, you mentioned that Campaign Zero has put forward 8 Can't Wait. We've talked about the 21st Century Task Force report. It'd be useful maybe just tick off very quickly. What are the 8 things that are the 8 that Campaign Zero is promoting? Because for a lot of people who are watching, they may be surprised that some of these things are practical and could be implemented quickly. I know just one off the top of my head that I know we can all focus on because it's been so painfully real these last few weeks. Chokeholds and strangleholds. Just saying that's not what we do. You don't need that in order to effectively restrain someone. So give me what are the 8 in executive summary form so people can hear what these specific things are.
Got you. So I didn't know the first question would come to me, but the 8 things are banning chokeholds and strangleholds, requiring de-escalation first, requiring a warning before pulling out a weapon, exhausting all alternatives for those actions, a duty of other officers to intervene, so officers can't just stand there and watch injustice happen, banning shooting at moving vehicles, we know that keeps police and everyday citizens safe, establishing a use of force continuum, and requiring all force to be reported. And I want to be really clear, together those 8 things can reduce police violence by upward of 70%. That does not stand in competition with what Philippe just walked us through. Because we know that these things can happen immediately without any executive order or act of Congress, all we need is a mayor to have the political will and courage courage to stand up and say, those eight can't wait, and I will go and change the use of force standard tonight, let alone tomorrow. So do that now, and then continue to work with your community, because we will continue to keep up the pressure, I can promise you that, to make sure that we are getting to those comprehensive public safety solutions that are community-based and community-oriented and far beyond anything that we're experiencing right now that Philippe just walked us through. These don't stand in competition with imagination. These are a necessary step immediately to keep people safe as we do the hard work of making sure we get to what's...
That's great. And let me just point out, in my opening remarks, I mentioned sometimes this tension is posed between political participation and protest. Philippe's an example of why you have to participate politically, because if you are on the streets protesting and making demands, having somebody on the city council who can follow up and respond and advocate and deal with pushback and is in the room when budgets are made and is, advising mayors on how they're going to negotiate the next collective bargaining contract with the police union. You need those folks in order to ultimately deliver the goods. I'm constantly mindful of the fact that this is not an either or thing, and there's so many ways, all of which are necessary to make a difference. When Rashad talked about the cultural element of this, Dr. King, this may be apocryphal, but I think somebody mentioned to him, just having an anti-discrimination bill, an anti-lynching bill, that's not going to change hearts and minds. He says, no, it won't, but it'll maybe stop me from getting lynched, and that's important too. So laws are important. On the other hand, the narrative and the stories and telling people, here, see me, I'm human, here's my pain. This is somebody's son, this is somebody's uncle. Here's the story that you need to understand about our background and our community. How do we break down stereotypes, as Eric Holder eloquently talked about? That's the work of a lot of people. So some are going to be on the streets protesting. Some are going to be running for office. Some are going to be writing. During this week, I picked up and reread The Fire Next Time. It is frightening to notice how James Baldwin can lay out a reality 50 years ago that sounds like it was written yesterday. And that's activism, that's work, that's participation. So I worry sometimes that, as we debate strategies, people start thinking there's one way of doing things. We all have a role to play, we all have a part. The more specific we are, practical, in the short term, as well as visionary in the long term, the better off we're going to be. But with that, I'm going to be quiet, because you don't need to hear from more old head stuff. But I just want to say how much I appreciate all of you. And Michael, I'm assuming that the conversation is going to continue.
Yes, sir. Let me go ahead and jump in and thank Brittany for the masterful moderation and for all the wisdom and hard work that was on display. I'm now going to turn it over to our Deputy Director for Network and Partnerships at My Brothers Keeper Alliance, Nicole Fields, who's going to take a couple questions from our MBK communities. So not everyone watching has an opportunity to ask questions, but our MBK communities do. So that's another reason you should become an MBK community. So Nicole is going to pose a couple questions, but we will get you out of here by 6:30, everyone. We realize that we've been on for a while, but we will be sending resources afterwards. We've also created a Google group so we can continue this conversation there as well. So Nicole, let me bring you on to field those questions.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, President Obama. Really powerful conversation. Tons of great questions. As Michael mentioned, we can continue this conversation. So if we don't get to your question, do not worry. We can continue this conversation in our Google group. I'm going to take the first question from our young people. Playon Patrick asks, this question is directed at Councilman Cunningham. How have the media's portrayal of frequent violent riots in Minneapolis affected your efforts to promote the work of protesters, activists, and elected officials pushing towards a self-sustaining public safety system?
Yes, thank you for that question, Playon. Excuse me. So, the media's portrayal of hyper focusing on the violent protests or the violence and the rioting happening during the protest really pulls away from what is actually happening. The real story of the trauma and the pain and the reason why folks are out on the ground doing the work, why we are traumatized as a community, why we are doing this work together. So the media is looking for a sensational story, and talking about the public health approach to public safety is not that sexy. So it's easier to be able to pick what's happening right now, make that newsworthy. And so what it does is it's distracting. It's distracting from the voice of the folks who are on the community, who have demands, who have a clear vision. It's distracting, it's pulling away from their voice and centering them. The folks who have been on the ground nonstop for years, some folks in their cases for decades. And so I want to make sure that I've been all over the media. I've been fortunate that folks have been reaching out all over the world, and I keep hammering home. Everybody wants to